One of these high-level commanders says, don't be worried because Trump is anointed by Jesus Christ to bring back the return.
Oh, no.
To bring back Jesus' return on earth. Commander claimed Trump was anointed by Jesus to cause Armageddon to justify the Iran tax.
Wow. See, that's like up there with Allah will protect me.
Exactly.
It's the same shit.
It's the same shit. It's just coming from a different religion.
Yeah,
but it's the same mindset. And he said, the superior had a big grin on his face when he said all of this, which made his message seem even more crazy.
Wow.
Bro.
Scary
That's
shit.
just as scary.
Now, it's important to remember that we are up against abject evil. We are up against a theocratic nightmare. People who are prepared to do anything on grounds of religious prophecy. Granted, we're supposed to believe that about Iran, but it seems equally, if not more so, applicable to our allies, the Zionists, as well as American Christian evangelicals. But that's okay, because we can obviously rely on the atheists in America to prevent us from getting into some sort of crazy holy war, right?
You have now this guy, Joe Kent. He quit this week. It was a big story. I think he was the counterintelligence guy. And he said, I can't go along with this because, you know what, he's been listening to too much Tucker Carlson. It's, you know, the Jews made us do it. It's just another version of anti-Semitism that comes out. First it was BDS, then it was their colonizers and genocide, which it wasn't, and all these other reasons, like you can't have a state in the world that's based on religion. And now the big answer is, no, Israel made us do it. We're Israel's bitch. I don't think we're Israel's bitch. I think we're Israel's ally. But, you know, if I have to be on one side of this MAGA thing, either Trump or Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and Nick Fuentes, I'll be with Trump on this one.
You heard that right. Bill Maher, guy who made his name dunking on religiosity, is now siding with Donald Trump because the other side of MAGA is so dangerous. The Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes sect, they are so dangerous. So the atheist Bill Maher is now defending a state based off of religion, and there happens to be just one state based off of religion that Bill Maher doesn't have a problem with, despite being one of the loudest atheists on earth. Fascinating. Fascinating that that's the one that he likes. I can't figure out why.
Listen, Joe Kent and Tucker together. So Joe is saying the, quote, darker theory is that Trump is under threat from Israel. Mind you, that's what he's saying. And he also suggests, well, and Charlie Kirk was too. And then he says, now, I'm not saying the Israelis killed Charlie Kirk, but there are questions. Let me say, anyone who believes Israel killed Charlie Kirk, you've lost your mind. That is a moonbat theory.
It's a pretty weird world when you have people like Ted Cruz and Bill Maher in lockstep. And you start to, once you like decipher this down, you recognize like, all right, well, what are the tie that binds here? Because obviously Ted Cruz and Bill Maher don't have a heck of a lot in common politically aside from this topic. So what could it be? I mean, you have very, very different opinions when it comes to religion too. And yet they align perfectly when it comes to the defense of Israel. It's fascinating. And this has been a big part of the noticing phenomenon that you have Christian evangelicals. I assume that's what Ted Cruz is, even though I'm not sure he believes in anything sincerely. And then you have atheists who are ethnically Jewish, and Bill Maher, who is equally and as adamant a defender of Israel as the most rabid, hardcore, pro-religion version of Israel defenders. And then suddenly you start to connect the dots and you go, oh, this is about Zionism. This is not about religion at all, really. In truth, and this is the sinister thing that we're not supposed to talk about or notice, is that it's about ethnic supremacy, really. Like, that's what it is. So much so that Americans are supposed to fight, die, and at minimum fund their bloodlust as they expand their empire to the detriment of our own. To the detriment of our own country, our own people, our own prosperity, our own freedom, our own safety, our own security, all of it. We must sacrifice all of it because ultimately we are a lesser people. You have to remember that. And if you disagree, that's because you're hateful. See? So they get to hate you, but if you go, wait, I'm not lesser than you, they go, oh, how could you hate us like that? Oh, interesting paradigm you've put me into. I either go along with your bloodlust and madness, or I'm labeled a hateful bigot or whatever. It's an interesting paradox. I can't see the manipulatory tactics are very, very hard to identify in that, aren't they? And the manipulation is so extensive that, in fact, you have to turn a blind eye. You have to look the other direction, even when it comes to the assassination of your fellow countrymen. And yes, I'm tying this back into my prior episodes about the Charlie Kirk assassination. I think it has been enough time that I need to break this down. I think this is, we've learned a lot over the past 10 days, or really the past month since I've talked about this, that there's more that we need to unpack. So let's start with that Ted Cruz little sermon there. He says, if you think that Israel took out Charlie Kirk, you've lost your mind. Now, granted, did Joe Kent say that? No, never once. So let's refresh your memory. What did he say?
Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation. How did you reach that conclusion?
I think this is key. I mean, this would be more challenging to explain had the Secretary of State, the President, and the Speaker of the House not come out and said that we conducted this attack at this time because the Israelis were about to do so. So that takes away the argument that there was an imminent threat, as in Iran was planning to attack us. It speaks to the broader issue. Who is in charge of our policy in the Middle East? Who is in charge of when we decide to go to war or not? In this case, the Israelis drove the decision to take this action, which we knew would set off a series of events, meaning the Iranians would retaliate.
Okay, so that's the first argument that he made, and never once does he mention the religion of Israel at all. He says that Israel is dictating our foreign policy. They were the catalyst for this war. He opposes that. Now, mind you, Joe Kent is an Iran hawk. He is not fond of the Iranian leadership at all. In many ways, he and I part ways on that. I don't have any love for the Iranian leadership either, but he is much more militarily inclined to confront them than I am. I strongly believe that they are 6,000 miles away and don't have the capacity to actually really touch us on the homeland, and therefore they aren't our problem. They are Israel's problem. And don't get it twisted, that's the primary reason that all of the Zionists have come out in opposition to Joe Kent's claims, is that he has totally given up the ghost. He's given up the game. That yes, our foreign policy is being dictated by Zionists. That's obviously true. And that's something that they cannot permit, because that's exactly what they do all the time. They push, they prod, they coerce us into fighting wars on behalf of a nation that is not our own. And as long as we don't talk about that, well, then that can continue. So if we are talking about it, it's a big problem. So they're going to smear you, obviously. But it's very, very difficult to contend with Joe Kent's argument as to Israeli influence in our foreign policy. Obviously, if you've looked at the past 25 years, or you've followed the show at all, or you've read anything at all over the past 25 years, you've probably come to the same conclusion. But a much easier angle of refutation and attack is to go after what he said about Charlie Kirk. Now, did he say that Israel or the Jews took out Charlie Kirk? No, that's not what he said. What he said was, I had leads as the Director of Counter-Terrorism that I was not permitted to run down in that role. And that's the part that I want to unpack today.
Charlie Kirk is killed publicly in a very horrific way, and we're not really even allowed to look into that at all. And Charlie Kirk was one of President Trump's closest advisors, and he also advocated heavily against a war with Iran. He was in the Oval Office in the lead up to the 12-day war. I wasn't particularly close with Charlie. He was very gracious to me when I was running for Congress, very, very supportive. So we knew each other. And the last time I saw Charlie Kirk on this earth was in June in the West Wing, in the stairway. And I said hi to him, and he looked me in the eye, and he said very loudly, and it's a small, you've been in the West Wing, it's small, it's a tight space. And he said, Joe, stop us from getting into a war with Iran. Very loudly.
He was single-minded.
And he walked off, and he went, I believe, into the Oval.
Now, I've played you about 20 clips over the past 6 months of Charlie Kirk, very eloquently laying out his reasons that he opposed a regime change war in Iran.
This is Israel's war. The worst possible case scenario is Iran says, okay, you humiliated us, you killed all of our leaders, we're going to go make this a regional mess and try to get as many people involved as possible. They're going to go after Americans, they're going to go after Saudis, they're going to go after everybody imaginable, just to create a big mess and to try to draw the world into it. Here's where I stand and where the MAGA base stands. We do not want U.S. boots on the ground. We do not want American kinetic involvement.
He was very explicit, and he seemed to understand the topic at a pretty high level, honestly. But today we're going to get into the text messages that were released by my friend Brett Weinstein about this very topic. And these text messages were sent between Brett and Charlie on June 18th, right around the time that we were first taking out their nuclear facilities, in which Brett Weinstein shares Charlie Kirk's post where Charlie had said the proponents for regime change have pivoted the last 24 hours. They know they are losing and their position is indefensible and unpopular. Keep the pressure on. Brett says, right there with you, Charlie. We have to shut these maniacs down. Not only is the Republic depending on it, but the citizens of Israel are too. Thank you. I totally agree, responds Charlie. Brett follows up. And by the way, I think the president needs us to keep the pressure on. The neocons are very vocal and admittedly powerful, but the public does not want war, especially not to be dragged into one by a belligerent Israeli regime. Now, mind you, Brett Weinstein is Jewish and Charlie Kirk is Christian. But more importantly than those differences, they have a tie that binds them in that they fucking love America and they don't want endless wars, which was a big part of the galvanizing effect that created the entire MAGA coalition leading into the 24 election. Now, lest you think that Charlie was some war hawk in sheep's clothing, he responds to Brett and he says, I know, we need to be better. I have a theory on this, which is the power of dissident media is very good retroactively at uncovering injustice or scandal. COVID, Ukraine, border. We are not good at driving real-time mass public opinion yet. The neocons are. I'm doing all I can, truly. I was in the White House all day fighting for America. Same tomorrow. So the reason I played that clip followed by reading off the text messages between Brett and Charlie is that I believe that timeline syncs up, and I believe that it confirms what Joe Kent had to say, that the last time he saw Charlie Kirk on this earth was in the West Wing, and Charlie looked him in the eyes and he said, don't let them take us to war in Iran. So let's hear how Dan Bongino, friend of Joe Kent, allegedly dealt with this information.
If
An attempted murder of a presidential candidate?
Attempted murder of a presidential candidate, and then there's another assassination attempt. There's been multiple public breaches of President Trump's security over the last year.
Yeah, correct.
And then, Charlie Kirk is killed publicly in a very horrific way, and we're not really even allowed to look into that at all.
Okay. Listen, folks, this part I have to just leave here. This is some of the most disgusting, unethical, and immoral stuff I have ever seen. Leveraging the death of my good friend, his brutal murder, his assassination, that the whole world watched in all of its horrifying gore. For your podcast appearance, you're disgusting. Thank you for your service to the country. You're also disgusting. This is filth.
So I'm going to pause it there because I want to make sure that we stick to the facts as opposed to Dan Bongino's emotional outburst, which, by the way, it's absolutely hilarious that he's saying it's disgusting that Joe Kent would bring this up, given that, hey, Dan Bongino, you were deputy director of the FBI, and you could have actually assisted in clarifying the situation and the conditions by which Charlie Kirk lost his life, but you chose to do nothing about it. So who's really disgusting when it comes to this topic? But anyways, what I wanted to remind you guys, that was on October 29th, 2025, so a little over a month after Charlie Kirk lost his life, it was reported that Joe Kent was frozen out of the Charlie Kirk assassination investigation by the FBI, by Kash Patel, by Dan Bongino. So now Bongino is going to piss and moan and kick his feet and maybe shadow box a little bit. But the truth is that no one has actually refuted that claim. That yes, as Director of Counter-Terrorism, Joe Kent was investigating, or at least attempting to investigate, foreign ties, foreign connections to the assassination of all of their friend in Charlie Kirk. And he was told to stop. Worse than that, Joe Kent says that he was frozen out of that information, that he was placing requests for information to run down those leads, and they were slow walked and then it just came to a stop. They just stopped providing him information by which he could do his job. So they did not want Joe Kent, the director of counterterrorism, investigating what could be argued was the highest profile terroristic attack that we've seen in many years in this country in terms of profile.
This is just filth. I wasn't allowed to ask questions, Joe Kent. I'm just going to leave that there, folks. And all you people defending him right now, I'll accept your apology later. You watch. You weren't allowed to ask questions? You sure about that? Sure you want that on the record, Joe? You weren't allowed to ask questions? Really? Go ahead.
Really even allowed to look into that at all. And Charlie Kirk was one of President Trump's closest advisors, and he also advocated heavily against a war with Iran. He was in the Oval Office.
He did? That's fascinating, because I've had conversations with Charlie too. I don't talk about them because the man's dead and I don't like to invoke his name for podcast clicks, okay? Only to remember him. And I'm not going to do it now. You sure that's how Charlie felt?
Yes, Mr. Bongino, I am very sure that's how Charlie felt. Now, was Charlie Kirk ultimately a water carrier for the Trump administration? Yes, 99% of the time, that's what he was. He was a coalition builder and a political creature, and he was going to privately voice his opposition to decisions he disagreed with and publicly support them. That's how he went about things, which is in large part why Charlie Kirk and I didn't get along very well, because while I knew that he agreed with me on a lot of these things, publicly he wouldn't say so. Privately, he was much more in alignment with America First and the non-interventionist libertarian camp. But publicly, he would give lip service to it, but when the rubber hit the road, when the bomb started to drop, Charlie Kirk would often give lip service in defense of President Trump's decision-making, which I found reprehensible. That doesn't change the fact that he was courageous enough to privately go into the White House in June and try and prevent a ground invasion at that time. And I genuinely, deeply appreciate him for that. But more than that, Charlie Kirk did 20-plus segments on his show talking about Iran over the preceding 5 years or decade. We've got confirmation from Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly and Dave Smith and basically everybody else that knew Charlie Kirk, that yes, he opposed a war, particularly a regime change war, particularly a ground invasion against Iran. Absolutely. He opposed that. So for Dan Bongino to pretend otherwise, to try and rewrite history, that is disgusting. That is reprehensible. And I'll leave that there.
So when one of President Trump's closest advisors, who is vocally advocating for us to not go to war with Iran and for us to rethink at least our relationship with the Israelis, and then he's suddenly publicly assassinated and we're not allowed to ask any questions about that, it's a data point. It's a data point that we need to look into.
As you guys know, I've been doing the show for 5 years now, and the show has exploded in listenership and popularity over the past year, and I couldn't be more appreciative. It's touched the top 50. At one point, it was in the top 25, I think, on Spotify for podcasts. So really appreciate that. But anytime I get some level of achievement like that, I like to reflect on what I've accomplished and also what I need to protect. And in my case, as well as probably yours, the first layer of protection, aside from yourself, is going to be your family. And a good tool to defend your family would be financial planning. That's why I have my partners over at Policy Genius. Policy Genius is an online marketplace that allows you to compare and contrast policies, life insurance policies, all side by side for free. And their licensed team helps you analyze these things very rapidly so you can get on with your life. They'll help you find the policy that is most affordable and fits your needs. Plan the year knowing that you've protected what you've built. With Policy Genius, you can see if you can find 20-year life insurance policies starting at just $276 a year for $1 million in coverage. Head to policygenius.com/lockdown to compare life insurance quotes from top companies and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/lockdown. Exactly right. It's a data point. It's a data point that we need to look into, which is all that myself and Ian Carroll and Candace have been doing over the past 6 months, or Barron, or, Coach Colin, all these people, is that it's a significant data point that Charlie Kirk, the guy who was the highest level proponent of Donald Trump, who was also an opponent of a war with Iran, got killed months after the bombing campaign against Iran and months prior to a major war against Iran. And you're supposed to pretend that that can't be correlated. You have to pretend that you cannot see the obvious connection between those things. What is the top motivation to try and eliminate someone like Charlie Kirk, someone who has major influence in the White House, who opposes full Zionist control over our foreign policy? And you're supposed to not talk about it. And if you do talk about it, you're a hateful, bigoted conspiracy theorist, nutcase, blah, 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 blah. But the truth is that connection is real, and it is probably the most fruitful lead we have for a motivation aside from the Tyler Robinson narrative.
What do you mean when you say we're not allowed to ask any questions about that?
We've been told that this individual, Robinson, is a lone gunman, and maybe he is. But the investigation that I was a part of, the National Counter-Terrorism Center was a part of, we were stopped from continuing to investigate. And the FBI will say that they stopped that because they wanted to turn everything over to the Utah state authorities. Everything's going to trial. It's very, very sensitive. But there was still a lot for us to look into that I can't really get into. But there was still linkage for us to investigate that we needed to run down. There's unanswered questions. We know the pressure because of the text messages that have been made public, that Charlie was under a lot of pressure from a lot of pro-Israel donors. And again, we know Charlie was advocating to President Trump against this war with Iran.
Now, it's important that you understand the mechanism for that stonewalling. And as I described it earlier, Joe Kent goes on to explain that he was placing requests for information so that he could run down those foreign leads to see if they had any merit to them at all. And they were slow walked and then ultimately cut off entirely. So the FBI's defense is going to be that, well, it's not as if we shut down the investigation. We just didn't want them investigating. We wanted to have the Utah Sheriff's Department investigate, and they could handle it on their own because they got their guy, Tyler Robinson. Open and shut case, dust off your hands, case closed, right? But here's the interesting thing. And this is the reason that the firewall between the Director of Counterterrorism and this investigation is really meaningful and matters a lot, is that if there are foreign connections, particularly when it comes to governments or terrorist organizations, Utah Sheriff's Department is not going to have access to classified information. Joe Kent would. So if there is classified leads or classified contacts or CIA operators or whoever else that you may be able to reach out to and get clarification on these issues, these alleged nodes of foreign influence or involvement in the Charlie Kirk assassination, Joe Kent would be able to get those answers. The Utah Sheriff's Department will never get those answers. And I believe that that's why Joe Kent was cut out of this investigation, is because there were foreign actors involved and they did not want that to come to light. Now, I can't prove that because obviously he's been cut out of the investigation and all of this stuff has been buried, but you should be asking yourself, why would you cut out the Director of Counterterrorism when it came to, as I said, one of the most high profile, if not the highest profile, terrorist attack in our country in the past couple of years? Charlie Kirk was a political figure assassinated for his political beliefs. Even if you believe that it was Tyler Robinson that did it, that's still a terrorist attack because it's attacking over its political violence to get political change. You're going after a top conservative commentator. But the other angle that's really important is to remember the chronology of this, is that they are now saying or alleging that Joe Kent was basically frozen out, not just of the Charlie Kirk investigation, but also of the deliberations when it came to war planning for the Iran invasion or attack.
I'm curious for what you heard about the way that went down, many of those critical meetings in the Situation Room.
Yeah, I think the imagery that's been publicly released is very telling, where you had one small group that was down in Mar-a-Lago that night, and then you had the rest up at the Situation Room at the time. Look, in the lead up to the 12-day war, we were having very robust debates that were part of the National Security Council process, and that played out over the course of about a month in the lead up to the 12-day war, and to include ahead of Midnight Hammer, where a lot of us said, okay, fine, if you bomb these sites, that's all well and good. We take out Iran's ability to enrich. That meets our strategic objective. Problem is the Israelis are going to come right back to us in a couple months and demand more because their goal is regime change. Like, they're not beating around the bush about this. And so that was known. And so from my optic in the lead up to this last iteration, that process didn't play out. And people can say, oh, Kent doesn't know because just he wasn't invited. But I can tell you the robust debate with the Deputies Committees, the National Security Council, that simply wasn't happening.
So in October, we have confirmed reports, thanks to Joe Kent, that in fact, yes, Joe Kent was trying to run down foreign lead involvements when it came to the Charlie Kirk assassination, and indeed, he was frozen out. But because he tried to run down the truth behind all of that, he was then additionally frozen out of deliberations when it came to the Iran war planning, effective earlier this year, January, February. And as I've already unpacked in my prior couple episodes, it is crystal clear that the motivating factor for our involvement in the attacks on Iran is Israel. So if you're thinking to yourself, okay, Joe Kent is trying to run down foreign involvement potentials when it comes to the Charlie Kirk assassination, and simultaneously he's being frozen out of what is a war on behalf of Israel, it doesn't take a fucking rocket science to connect those dots and go, hey, maybe that's the reason our director of counterterrorism was frozen out of both of these discussions. Maybe.
That group chat that Charlie was in, that 48 hours before he was killed, in which he basically said he was done with the pressure that the Jewish donors were putting on him. He had lost another $2 million donation from a Jewish donor. He might have to invite Candace Owens, just as sort of a middle finger to these people to let them know that they couldn't pressure him, and that he wasn't going to cancel Tucker Carlson. So this is 48 hours before he was killed. This group chat, which was in I think a WhatsApp group, involved Charlie and Josh Hammer and some others, and that was provided by Andrew Colvett to someone in government, and some online are speculating that, well, we know it was leaked to Candace Owens, and she reported on it, and some are speculating that you were the leaker. So did you leak that document to Candace?
No.
Did you leak it all to the media?
No.
So Joe Kent has gone on to deny any leaks, which is now the accusation which they're using to try and smear his name and basically make you ignore the claims that he's making that Israel dictated this war. But we have Donald Trump, who the same night that Joe Kent resigned, Donald Trump comes out with a Truth Social post saying, these fucking Israelis just keep blowing shit up against our will. Like, we didn't agree to this. They're blowing up oil fields. They're doing X, Y, and Z. This is not what we wanted. It's like, oh, so I guess they are kind of dictating how this thing plays out now, aren't they?
Thank you, Mr. President. You talked to Prime Minister Netanyahu about attacking the oil and gas fields.
Yeah, I did. I told him, don't do that. And he won't do that. We didn't discuss. You know, we do, we're independent. We get along great. It's coordinated, but on occasion he'll do something, and if I don't like it, and so we're not doing that anymore.
So we've had, over the past month, Rubio, Hegseth, Trump, Mike Johnson, now the director of counterterrorism, a bunch of other people too, but I can't remember all their names, have all came out and said, yeah, this was a preemptive strike because of a counter strike that was going to come from the Iranians because of Israel's decision to strike. Therefore, the only conclusion you can come to is that Israel was the ultimate provocateur in this, and that we were just along for the ride, which is ultimately the entirety of Joe Kent's claim, that I don't want to be in this position if we are not pursuing single-mindedly America first priorities, American goals when it comes to our empire. And really all you need to see to understand who you ought to believe in this is who are the detractors of Joe Kent. You've got your Ben Shapiro and your Dave Rubin and your Dan Bonginos and also Jonathan Greenblatt, head of the ADL.
Take Joe Kent. I'm resigning because Israel pulled us into the war. Iran didn't pose a threat.
Right. And so my question to you is, do you look at that and say that that is an this is the question. Is his decision and his letter, in your mind, a protest of the war and what Israel as a country politically is doing?
Yeah.
Or do you look at that and say, he's an anti-Semite and he doesn't like Jews? This is what I think is the fundamental question.
Right. Well, look, let's talk about it. So you can say, I oppose this war on some grounds, but to blame Jews or the Jewish state for the war?
But Joe Kent didn't do that. He didn't blame Jews. He didn't say that. Not even close. A million miles away from it. He said that Israel was the one dictating it, and he didn't like it. He said that Israel was the one who was catalyzing it, and he didn't want to go along with that. So according to Greenblatt, you can oppose this war, but you just can't oppose the nation that started it? Please explain to me how I'm supposed to do that. Like, if I oppose the war in Gaza, how am I supposed to say that without saying I oppose the participant in it? And once you connect that dot, you kind of have the skeleton key to unlock the entire propagandistic paradigm that, in fact, You are not permitted to oppose wars that are to the benefit of or participated in by Israel. You cannot oppose them because obviously that makes you oppositional to the Jewish state. But fortunately, that trick has basically stopped working, in large part thanks to Tucker Carlson, another guy who they have tried to cancel and smear and obliterate over the past couple of years.
Think of Gaza.
What do I think of Gaza?
Yeah.
I think the war in Gaza, to start with, was a perfectly reasonable response in response to the horrors of October 7th. I think now the places, I mean, I've been there. Have you been to Gaza? You go in and you see a flattened place. I think it is a disaster for the future of Israel, a disaster for the Palestinian people, a horror, 70,000 people dead.
Why would you describe it first as a disaster for the future of Israel? You've got tens of thousands of civilians murdered, but it's foremost a disaster for the future of Israel? No, it's foremost a disaster for the families of the dead kids.
Absolutely. I made 3 points.
Because everybody sucks up to Israel in this way that suggests they're afraid. And everyone is afraid, and you know that. Everyone's like, the real problem is calling people anti-Semites allows real anti-Semites to flourish. It's like, no, actually, the real problem with calling people anti-Semites who aren't is accusing the innocent of a crime they didn't commit. And the real crime in Gaza is killing people who did nothing wrong. So those are the real problems, I would say. But no one can say it because you have to be like, oh, no, but really, October 7th
I don't know what you're talking about, Gaza. We're having a...
Everyone watching this knows what I'm talking about.
That's absolutely right. Everybody watching that knows exactly what he's talking about. And everybody knows that he's right. That you cannot oppose any of these wars without being accused of things that you aren't. You cannot oppose the war without first saying how it's the reason I oppose it is because I think it's ultimately to the detriment of Israelis, not to the 70,000 people that have been blown up. You have to oppose it on the grounds that this ultimately jeopardizes the people who are blowing up the kids. And this, more than anything, is why they hate Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes and all of these figures, is that it's not even so much that they oppose the war in Gaza or they oppose the war against Iran. It's that they show you what the game is. They have broken down the propagandistic paradigm by which you are manipulated, by which you are controlled. And if you can see through that, you have now deciphered the matrix. You're now a free man again, or woman. You're now able to actually proceed and analyze things in an honest fashion as opposed to a fearful one, as opposed to a controlled one. And this is why Jonathan Greenblatt and others will constantly attack all of those figures that I just named off, is that that's what they're doing. They are breaking down the paradigm. They are showing you the matrix code for what it is. They are freeing your mind, not so that you can go out and hate and abuse random Jewish people, not at all. But rather, you can analyze all of these things in an objective fashion, that you can recognize that death and destruction against innocents is wrong, no matter their religion or skin tone. You can actually participate in analyzing these things from a Christian worldview, one of actual individualism, one of actual humanitarianism, one of actual love and concern for the innocents, as opposed to fearful, groveling, sniveling opposition while still walking on eggshells that you might be called a name that isn't applicable to you. They are infusing courage back in opposition to this issue. That is the thing that they hate the most, that it's no longer just like, well, I just want to focus on America. I mean, this is, I've already said this 1,000 times. Tim Pool's my buddy, but this is the type of opposition that you'll get from Tim. I don't care about Israel at all. I want to focus on America. It's like, you cannot focus on America as long as the American government is almost universally focused first and foremost on a foreign country. And that foreign country, if you didn't notice, is Israel. So you can't say, I'm America first, I don't want to talk about Israel. You have no choice. And that is why Tucker Carlson is a top 5 podcast in America. And that is why Dan Bongino is now number 98, even though he used to be in the top 5, is that people see the game for what it is. And Charlie Kirk was starting to see the game for what it was. And just as he became vocal about his opposition, and just as he privately became adamant about his opposition, as soon as he said, I have no choice but to leave the pro-Israel cause, as soon as he said, shove it, I'm going to invite Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, and I don't give a fuck what the donors do. Pull your millions of dollars. I'm proceeding with principle for once. 48 hours later, his life was taken in front of our fucking eyes. And you're not supposed to ask any connections connecting the dots between his opposition to the Iran war, his willingness to platform people who are oppositional or at least critical of a relationship to Israel. He said, I'm going to do that. I don't care what you think about it. And he was murdered. Not years later, not months later, days later, double-digit hours later. That's how quickly, after him putting his fucking feet in the ground and reinforcing his spine to actually take that stand, that he was laid out in front of our eyes. And now Joe Kent resigns, and he reiterates some of the opposition that Charlie Kirk was starting to espouse, and he is smeared just the same as Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens or Dave Smith or Fuentes or anybody else that opposes this madness. And who do they send out to attack and smear him?
Joe Kent is a friend of mine and has been a friend for a long time. But my job here is not to have friends. On the outside, I can have friends. My job here is to tell you the truth. His history of service and sacrifice, again, is beyond question. I don't blame the guy for resigning. If you can't and don't want to enact a presidential policy, then resign. That had nothing to do with me, folks. You can listen to all the bullshit all you want. These black pillars, doomers, and liberal media folks, they are desperate to cleave the movement in half. It's going to be over this Israel issue, but it's based on, here's the takeaway here, here's point number one. It's based on the foundational theory that Donald Trump is a weak president who's being dragged around by the Israelis and Netanyahu. If you believe that, listen to me. I can't help you. It's just not the show for you.
Yeah, you're right, Dan. That isn't the show for me. It's not the show for the rest of America based off your ratings either. Now, keep in mind, the guy that they sent out to try and smear all of these people, Dan Bongino, was responsible for, in my opinion, covering up the Butler attack on Donald Trump. He was also obviously responsible for covering up the Epstein operation. He was also obviously responsible for misleading us about other potential motives when it came to the Charlie Kirk assassination. And he is now responsible for smearing his friend, Joe Kent, when he came out and told us the truth about the catalyst for this latest war with Iran. And if you've followed Liberty Lockdown for the past couple of years, you already have reason to suspect that all of those items that he was responsible for covering up or misleading us on have potential Israeli ties. And his job now, after resigning and accomplishing nothing as deputy director of the FBI, is to, again, get back in the public conversation and smear all of the people who are telling you the truth about these issues and mislead you once again. So as far as I'm concerned, Dan Bongino he didn't resign from the FBI. He was reassigned. Now, was he reassigned to like CIA propaganda department? Or was he reassigned to a foreign intel agency's propaganda arm? Because that's kind of how it feels to me, Dan. Unless you think I'm grasping at straws, assuming that, sure, perhaps a foreign intel operative could be involved in the taking out of Charlie Kirk. I want you to look at this video that came out yesterday. This is Steve Sweeney, a British journalist who works for RT in Lebanon, just yesterday, or maybe 48 hours ago, nearly getting double-tapped by the IDF.
Further rocket attacks were reported against Nahariya and admitted. Well, you've probably all seen the footage of the airstrike that took place in Sur district as we were reporting on the destruction of a bridge. We've been treated in hospital for our injuries. I had a shrapnel wound in my arm, deeply embedded in the muscle here. That's been taken out, and here it is in this pot here. But what I do want to say is that this was a deliberate, targeted attack on journalists. There's no mistake about it. This was an Israeli precision strike from a fighter jet. What we were doing was we were reporting on the attacks on bridges, which is effectively severing South Lebanon from the rest of the country. 1 million people now internally displaced. This is the real story.
So that's probably something that you didn't hear about. Additionally, you probably haven't heard about the fact that the reason that we are the tip of the spear when it comes to the attacks against Iran right now is because Israel, the IDF, is involved in invading and displacing 1 million plus Lebanese right now. So obviously they can't be bothered to take on their war in Iran. We're going to have to fight that for them so that they can ethnically cleanse the eastern portion of Lebanon. So I'll end with this. You can either take your advice or your investigations from people like Joe Kent or Steve Sweeney, who's an absolute savage. I can't even imagine. I don't have the nerve to go out there, especially if you almost got taken out by a bomb and then be reporting the very next day in the open where they could hit you again. I mean, that dude's an animal. Or Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens or any of the people that we've come to respect over the past couple of years. Or you can listen to people like Dan Bongino or Dave Rubin with prognostications that age about as well as dog shit.
So allow me to make a prediction here in my prediction stuff. I'm not Polly Market, I'm not Call She, but I'm pretty good at predictions. And my prediction here is that everything that the media is now going to say about Iran's going to close the Strait of Hormuz and energy prices are going to go crazy and all these, none of this is going to come to pass. That isn't to say there won't be a little bumps here and there in the market, and it's not to say one random thing, bad thing might happen to a ship or something like that. But Iran has basically, their military has basically been decimated.
That was 2 weeks ago. So yeah, I would advise, if anyone is still listening to Rubin or Shapiro or Bongino or any of these fucking hack propagandists, I don't know why, for the life of me. I mean, it's like listening to Kramer on stock predictions. It's like you just haven't learned anything over the past decade. Seriously? Not only did he get the oil and gas prediction wrong in record time, oil per barrel is like 120 plus already, but also he says that Iran's been totally militarily degraded. They shot a missile that went way further than we thought possible just yesterday at one of our secret bases. They also took out an F-35, a fifth generation fighter jet that allegedly they shouldn't have any capacity to take out, but they did. And here's the really scary reality is that when it comes to these types of wars and all of the war gaming that went into the lead up to the war against Iran, it was very consistently reported by our top advisors across all of the administrations that ultimately Iran had escalation dominance, that if we continued to tit for tat to the top of the escalation ladder, ultimately, we could not prevail without dropping nukes, which for any sane country is an option off the table, particularly when you're dealing with a country that doesn't have nukes. So are you going to nuke a nukeless country? Really? Is that where we're headed? And I'll be straight with you. I don't know. I don't know where we're headed with this war. There is reports, major reports coming out yesterday that there are another 5,000 Marines that are being deployed to the arena, that there are major reports that they are, in fact, preparing for a small ground incursion, probably to either clear the strait or get a foothold by which we can then bring in major troop totals to actually participate in a full-on ground invasion and regime change war on the ground, which would be catastrophic. So I'm not sure where this is headed, but I just wanted to break down this Charlie Kirk angle because, as is so often the case, it goes under the radar because it's put into the woo-woo tinfoil hat category. I just want to encourage you not to feel that way. It's okay for you to see these connections and say, hey, there was foreign intel connections per Joe Kent, the Director of Counter-Terrorism, and he was firewalled from that information so that he couldn't run down those leads. And until we have answers to those leads, you have every right as an American, if not an obligation as an American, to demand answers to those questions. This is your countrymen. Whether you loved or hated Charlie Kirk is completely fucking irrelevant. This is an American political commentator taken out by somebody or someone or some entity. And until we have an ironclad answer as to who and why and how he was taken out, don't let any motherfucker tell you to stop looking, ever. If you enjoyed this episode, hit the like button. Leave a comment down below if I got anything wrong. And get cozy over at mypillow.com. Use promo code LOCKDOWN. And last but not least, share the show. Love you guys. Peace.
Last night, I was on my buddy Clint Russell's podcast, Liberty Lockdown. Clint Russell, by the way, criminally underrated. He's great. So it was me, him, and Ian Carroll. And we did.
Yeah, it was trending. You guys were trending.
Yeah, well, it was a great show.